Again, it's so great to see you today. Hope your week has gone really well. This is week number 2 of our brand new teaching series that we kicked off last week called Heart Attack. Now, if you missed last week, again, I want to encourage you, just go and check it out on their YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and in the search bar there, just type in Level 13 Church and you can find everything that we've done over the last few months has been listed there. So I would encourage you to go back and take a listen to the sermon series from last week, our kickoff. But basically, this entire series, we are focusing on 4 distinct enemies of our heart. Now, we said this, that we have this information, this passage of text that was written by the wisest man who ever lived, a guy named by King Solomon, who said this. He said, above all else, above everything that you do, guard your heart, because all that you do flows from it. Everything that we do flows out of our hearts. And so our hearts are a prime suspect for attack. Now, these 4 enemies of our hearts, they are devastating. They are destructive. And just like a clogged artery, they can lie dormant for days or weeks or months, even years, without showing any signs that they're there, and yet all the while they're doing damage underneath. And so we want to do the hard work of exposing these enemies. Last week, we kicked things off by talking about what I think is the most dangerous of these 4 enemies: anger. If you missed last week, again, I want to encourage you to go back and listen to it, especially if you or someone you know might have an anger problem. It's a really good way to jump in and hopefully get rid of this enemy of anger in our hearts. But we said for anger that it creates this debt-to-debtor relationship. There's this something is taken from me. Basically, when you and I get angry, it all boils down to this one basic idea. I didn't get what I want. I didn't get my way. We don't like that, and that makes us angry. That definition makes us angry, but it's true. We just strip it all the way down. I didn't get my way. I didn't get what I wanted. And so anger says, you owe me. You didn't give me what I wanted. You owe me. And it doesn't care who the you is, really. Anger just wants somebody to pay this debt. And so we've got this debt-to-debtor relationship that goes on. And we said essentially the cure for anger is to cancel the debt quickly. It's to forgive. As soon as someone incurs a debt on us and they do something to us, then we forgive the debt. We cancel the debt immediately. And it almost feels like we're letting them get off the hook. But we're not, because we're not forgiving them because they deserve it. We're forgiving them because God, through Jesus, has forgiven us. And so we instead turn and we offer that same forgiveness that we've been given. That's how we get rid of anger. This morning, we're going to move on to enemy number 2. And this enemy is different than the other 3 that we're going to talk about. This particular enemy actually has the ability to masquerade itself and look like a virtue. It can actually look like something good in your life and in mine. So what are we going to talk about that can look good, but it's really bad? This morning, we're going to focus on greed. Now, greed can masquerade as something good because greedy people, they're savers. Saving's a good thing. Greedy people are planners, and planning is a good thing. Greedy people are responsible, and being responsible is a good thing. And so this enemy of our heart can get in and say, oh no, I'm actually doing something that's really good. I'm actually honoring God with the way that I'm living my life, when all along the core is greed. So we're going to define greed this way. It's a person's belief that they deserve every good thing that comes their way and every good thing that possibly could come their way. It's the belief that, hey, what's coming my way, I deserve it. What's coming my way, or what even could come my way, I deserve that too, because I'm really a nice guy, or I'm really a nice lady, and good things should come my way. I've worked hard for this. It should come my way. I deserve this. So where anger says, you owe me, greed says, I owe me. I deserve this. This is coming my way. I deserve this. This is all for me. Now, before we get too deep into the teaching this morning, I want to just go ahead and put this out there. Chances are, when I said we're talking about greed this morning, there are some who've already decided, hey, I can check out because this is not me. I'm not greedy. And let's just be honest, I don't have enough money to be greedy. Greedy people are millionaires and billionaires. Those are the greedy people. You know, I have a couple of zeros in my bank account. Sometimes it's a zero and then a decimal and two more. But I can't be greedy. Well, I want to make a really, really provocative and probably anger-filled statement. Greed has absolutely nothing to do with socioeconomics. Greed and being a greedy person has nothing to do with the number of zeros in your bank account. It has everything to do with the condition of your heart. And so if you feel like, hey, I'm not a greedy person, humor me if you would, and just stay tuned in. Just stay checked in for a little while, because I believe what we're going to discover together is that more of us than we think struggle with this enemy of greed. So Jesus, fortunately for us, had some really interesting words to say about greed. In fact, he said this in Luke's gospel document, this account that he wrote of the life and teachings of Jesus. He had this to say. He quotes Jesus in Luke chapter 12. He says, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed." Now, within the context of where Jesus is talking here, there are thousands of people gathered around him. Chances are, within this group of thousands of people, there are very few affluent, wealthy people. There might have been a couple. But chances are, the majority of the people in this group of thousands that were around Jesus, that were hearing this teaching, they were poor. In fact, earlier, Jesus had quoted the prophet Isaiah when he said, "Hey, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because I've come to do what? To preach the good news to the rich?" It's not what he said. He said, "I've come to preach the good news to the poor." So chances are, in this group of thousands of people, the majority of them are poor. They don't have millionaire status or billionaire status. They don't have dollars for days. And so that affects all of us. He's talking to every single one of us this morning, no matter where we are. And if he just left it at be on guard, watch out for all kinds of greed, then we would be like, okay, Jesus, a little more information here would be helpful. It'd be nice. Tell me what I'm supposed to do, what I'm looking out for. Well, he doesn't leave us hanging. He gives us more information, and we're going to dive into that in just a little bit. But before we do, I want to list some characteristics of those who suffer with greed. Greedy people. Here are 11 characteristics. Greedy people talk and worry a lot about money. Like it's their frontal lobe, right? It's the thing that is right here. Many conversations are just always about money. They're not cheerful givers. Notice it doesn't say they're not givers, because you can be greedy and still give, but you can do so reluctantly. They're reluctant to share. Hey, what's mine is mine, and what's mine isn't yours. You know, we hold tight-fisted to things. They're poor losers. They don't want to lose, because if I lose, then you're taking something that's coming my way, something good that should be headed towards me. They quibble over insignificant amounts of money. Now, many of us, I think probably all of us in the room, if we were to let someone borrow $20, we're not going to think a whole lot about it later on. We're not going to bring it up. But greedy people, they'll bring it up often until that $20 is back in their hands. They talk like they only have just enough to get by. Hey, I can barely make ends meet. Yes, I just bought a new vehicle, and I'm scheduled to get a new SUV or a new all-terrain vehicle or a new boat or fill in the blank, whatever, next week. But yeah, I only have enough to get by. They often create a culture of secrecy around them. They won't let you forget what they've done for you. They remind you over and over again. Hey, remember that time when You didn't have any money and I bought your lunch. Yeah, you remember that? Greedy people are reluctant to express gratitude. They can say thank you, but it's like, to use a southern term, it's like pulling eye teeth to make it happen. It's not easy. Greedy people are not content with what they have. They're always looking for that next big and best thing, that hey, this thing will make me happy if I can get there. And then finally, they attempt to control people with their money. Now, we read this list, and I would dare say that there's anyone in the room or anybody watching online who would lift their hands and say, yep, that just explained me in a nutshell. That's who I am. Very few of us would say that, right? Because we don't think that we're greedy. And yet greed is an enemy that weasels its way into our hearts. And if we're not careful, we'll find ourselves behaving like, living like greedy people. See, we need to know this. Greed is not an appetite. Or greed is an appetite that it can never be satisfied, though. It always wants more. Greed always is looking for the next biggest and best and brightest thing. It always wants more. And the root of greed isn't what we would think. It isn't necessarily stuff. The root of greed is fear. The root cause of greed in your life and in mine isn't an insatiable desire for more. It is a fear that we won't have enough. Now, when we think of greedy people, we think of hoarders, right? We think of people who, they've just got stuff piled for days in rooms everywhere, and it's just piling up. And that's what we think of when we think of greedy people. We think, Marie Kondo needs to show up and teach people how to organize their life or whatever, fill in the blank with whoever you like to help fill in your, clean it all out, whatever. But greedy people are really fearful people. They're not hoarders necessarily. They're people who are afraid. Well, what are they afraid of? There are two dominant lies that characterize greedy people. First, they believe God can't take care of them, that God is unable to take care of their needs, to meet their basic needs. Instead, they feel like that all falls on me. That's my responsibility. I have to provide for myself. I have to save for a rainy day. I have to make sure that I've got comfort and security and safety and enough. God can't take care of me. And secondly, the second lie is God will not take care of me the way that I want him to. God will not meet my need the way that I want him to. As Jesus is teaching this group of thousands of people in Luke chapter 12, it's interesting that he doesn't specifically speak towards greed. He doesn't come right out and say, hey, all you greedy people, listen up. He says, watch out, be on guard for every kind of greed. And then he leans in and he begins teaching through something that all of us probably could quote or could talk about just a little bit. He says, look, your Father knows what you have need of. He says, consider the birds of the air. Consider the ravens. They don't have storehouses. They don't sow and reap. They don't put up for a rainy day. They don't put up for the future. And yet God feeds them. And then he says, look, you're worth more than birds. You're more important than birds. God has bigger picture and a bigger plan for you than birds. And then he goes on and he says, look, consider the flowers. Consider the wildflowers. He says, they're here today and they're gone tomorrow. They're beautiful. Solomon in all of his glory, in all of his splendor. He didn't look as beautiful as any of these things, and yet they're here today and then tomorrow they're thrown into the fire. God clothes them in beauty. And you're worth so much more than these flowers, than the grass of the field. He says, don't worry about the things that you should eat and the things that you should wear. Don't let that be something that consumes you. Your Father knows you have need of all these things. And he says this in verse 32. He says, don't be afraid. He speaks to the fear that's there. He doesn't speak to the greed. He says, don't hoard stuff away. He didn't say that, don't hoard stuff away. He speaks to the fear. Don't be afraid. Don't be fearful, little flock. For your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. And then he tells us the cure for the fear that's deep within that causes greed. He tells us the cure for the fear that buries its way into our heart, that causes us to feel like, I have to be in control. I have to be the one who figures all this out. I have to be the one who makes it happen. He speaks to that fear and he says, look, if you want to cure greed in your life, sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourself that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes and no moth destroys. And then he says this in verse 34. For where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. He says, look, don't let fear be the dominant concept, the dominant philosophy, the dominant ideology that you live through. Don't let fear of what's going to happen tomorrow. Don't let fear of thinking I'm not going to have enough. God's not going to provide for me. He isn't going to take care of me. Don't let that fear define you. Instead, trust in me. Sell your possessions and give this stuff to the poor. And then provide yourself purses in heaven where no thief is going to show up. Where moth's not going to destroy. Where the stuff that you try to gather here and hoard here is going to get destroyed. It's going to get used up. It's not going to last. It's going to break. It's going to go out of style. Don't think you've got to hoard that stuff away here. There's going to be a market crash. You're going to lose money. But don't let that be the defining thing, that the thing that you're working so hard to do. Instead, store up treasures in heaven. Let your confidence in me be the thing that is your guiding force. Recognize me as your source. Recognize me, God would say, as the one who provides every good thing for you. And it's my joy to do so. He said earlier, Jesus said earlier, he said, it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. That's what he desires to do. He doesn't want to withhold anything from you. He's not going to make you sit back and suffer through things. If we want to just put it incredibly simply, we can say it like this. We destroy greed in our lives by becoming givers. We destroy greed in our lives by becoming givers. We destroy fear that gives birth to greed by giving. Now, you all have heard me speak before about my insufficiency when it comes to planting and growing anything. I kill everything that comes into my home that is not a human, okay? Like if it is a plant or a vegetable or a flower, I kill it. I'm really good at that. And we've proven this year that it's me and not Haley, because she and Madeline went out and they planted flowers and they've thrived. They grew and they were beautiful. And I'll go out there and I get close to them and they die. It's just, I don't know, it's just something about me. Or I mow them down. That happens too. So, guilty as charged. That's okay. But even someone as inept at planting and growing things knows this. You can't simply cut the leaves off of a plant and expect it to die away. You've got to get the root. The root has to be removed. When I was in high school, we were required to take one agriculture class, shop, ag, whatever you wanted to call it. And so one of our projects where we had to go out and prune the trees and the bushes around the school. make sure that everything was ready to go. And so I did, and I had a pair of loppers, and I was just going, I was going to town. When I finished, there was one stick standing up, and everybody was making fun of me. They were laughing, and my teacher came along, and he said, no. He said, you're laughing at him now, but what's going to happen is that's going to be the fullest tree out of every one that was pruned at this time. This time next year, just wait and see if that's not the biggest and fullest tree. And sure enough, it was. See, getting what was visible made it look really silly. It made it look like, hey, something had happened here, but what was going on underneath was going to regrow everything and then some. And if you and I really and truly want to get rid of greed in our lives, want to kill the fear that leads to greed, we can't just look at what is evident. We can't just look at how we interact with money. We can't just look at how we hold on to stuff and think that we're taking care of everything. We can't just throw a couple of bucks in the offering plate or whatever the case may be and think, you know what, I'm not greedy anymore. Because if we don't dislodge the fear that is driving the decisions that we make, then we're going to go right back into that greedy lifestyle, and quick. And it will become even greater of a stronghold than we've ever experienced before. And I want to make this statement too, because some of us, I think, might be guilty of saying, well, I'm not a greedy person because I have compassion on those who are struggling and suffering, those who have less. I feel compassion. Well, that's awesome, but greed's not a feeling. It's a refusal to act on what we feel. It's refusing to move and act on that feeling that we have. It's simply saying, you know what, I feel bad that person doesn't have anything to eat, but I'm going to kind of bounce my eyes so I don't have to make eye contact and actually do something about it. Or, man, they're really going through a tough time. I'll pray for them. James talks about that. He says, look, you tell me you have faith, but I'm going to show you my faith by the work that I do. He says, look, you can't say to someone who's hungry and without what they need for the day and not clothed and look to the person and say, hey, man, stay well fed and warm. I'll pray for you. Peace out. He said, that's not faith. That's arrogance. That's greed. That's fear, because if I give you something that came my way, then I'm not going to have enough to take care of me. So if greed isn't a feeling, it's a refusal to act on what we feel, and it's driven by fear. And we know that we need to become givers to get rid of this root of fear that's in our hearts. What needs to happen? Because it's not as simple as just saying, hey, Jesus, I'm not afraid anymore. I trust you. If it were that simple, we all would do it, right? Everyone would do that. Hey, Jesus, I trust you. It's going to require you and me to change the way we think. See, the greedy heart asks the question, how can I use this to bless myself? I deserve this. How can I use this to bless myself? But the generous heart says, why has God provided me with more than I need? Why has God given me more than I need? What difference can I make in the world around me? Who can I serve with what He has blessed me with? Who can I offer something to? Not how can I bless myself, it's how can I bless somebody else? How can I move from the place of thinking that it's all about me to thinking that it's not about me, and I'm just kind of a conduit that God gets blessings through to someone else, to serve someone else? This is a hard thing for us to wrestle with, because at the root, none of us want to think that we're greedy. But greed is no respecter of persons. Greed doesn't look at your situation and say, I'm going to attack you because you've got a lot. Greed looks at all of us the same and says, if you have a heart, then you're a candidate. If you have a heart, then you're a candidate for me to sneak in there and cause damage. But if we flip the way that we ask these questions, if we move beyond this, how can I bless myself? How can I bless somebody else? It's going to require something difficult. It's going to require, I think, 3 stages, 3 steps. So step number 1, for those of us in the room and those of us who are watching online, for some of us, it's going to mean we become givers for the first time. It's going to mean that we step up to the plate and we become givers for the very first time, or for the first time in a long time. And let me tell you the argument you're going to be met with. The argument's going to be, I can't afford to give. I can't afford to give. I don't have enough coming in. Well, at the risk of making you mad at me, I just want to make a couple of statements. Radical generosity is going to require a life change. That may mean I don't go out to eat as much as I used to. That may mean that I skip the Starbucks or the Dunkin' Donuts or the Tim Hortons or wherever you go to get your coffee fix, or Bigsby Coffees, whatever. Maybe I don't go there. Maybe it means that I give up that vice, that thing that I've enjoyed, that thing that I've held on to, that's costing me money that I could be giving somewhere else. Radical life change. Phase 2, step 2. For those of us in the room who are already givers, maybe what that looks like is we up the percentage that we give. Now, in the church, and I'm going to talk about the church because we're in the church, and that's kind of my world. In the church, we have gotten really good at talking about the tithe. And like that's the cap, like that, hey, I give my 10% and I'm good. I've done everything expected of me. That's an Old Testament Jewish scripture philosophy that's there. But if we want to go back to the Old Testament, we want to go back to the Jewish scriptures, let's just go back for real. Because it wasn't just the tithe. The tithe was just a small portion. There were free will offerings. There were offerings for sin. There were offerings for all these different things. People were consistently and constantly giving and giving and giving. And so this idea that if we hit 10% giving, like I've given my 10% and there's nothing else required of me, we're wrong. We're wrong. Nowhere does it say in Scripture, hey, you hit 10%, stop. Nowhere. And so maybe for those of us in the room who were already givers, maybe we look at making some radical life change and we cut out some things that we can, shocker, live without, and we give a little bit more. Maybe the third phase of us, maybe there's some of us in the room, we're already giving above that 10%, but we want to just be extravagantly generous. And maybe we downsize. We just get rid of a lot of the extra stuff that we don't need. And instead of putting that money in the bank so we can go and buy more stuff that we don't need, we find somebody who's really in need and we bless them with that. Or we find an organization that we believe in and we bless them with that so that they can do the work that they're doing in our city more efficiently, more effectively. Anytime I talk about greed and I talk about giving, there's always an internal struggle for me. And that internal struggle is because of this idea that the church only wants my money. The church only wants to talk about my money because they want more money to come in so that we can give the pastor a raise. Let me just be emphatically clear. That has nothing to do with this conversation this morning. Nothing. My heart behind our conversation this morning isn't to get more money into the church so that I can live my life as a greedy person. My goal in having this conversation this morning is that so you and I will not walk through life subject to this enemy who wants to destroy us. My goal in having this conversation isn't to make anyone in the room feel bad about your financial situation and the fact that maybe you haven't been able to give. It's instead to shine a light on how we can free ourselves of this enemy and how maybe we need to make some crazy, radical life changes so that we can give. Because I'm convinced, as I stand here this morning, and I have lived it in my life for the last 20 plus years, that God honors those who honor Him and trust Him. I've not always had everything I've wanted, but I have always had everything I've ever needed. I may not have always driven the nicest vehicle or lived in the best home or had the nice newest clothes or the nice newest piece of electronic, but you know what? I've never been without. Even when I didn't have money coming in, even when I didn't have a job and I didn't have an actual income that was showing up in my home consistently every week or every 2 weeks, I never missed a bill. I never went hungry. I was never without. And throughout that entire time, we never missed an opportunity to give. That's not to brag on us. It's to brag on Him. Because He's our source. He is our source. He's the one that provides everything that you need and everything that I need. It's not about you and how hard you work or how good you are, how wise of a manager with money that you are. Those are all fine things. Those are all great things. But if you're looking to you as your source, you might want to change your name to God. And there's not a person in this room who's willing to make that type of a change. So why don't we make a change in the other way? Instead of saying, God, it relies on me. God, I'm going to do my part, but I'm trusting you as my provider. We kill the enemy of greed by becoming radically generous to the point that it changes our lives. And I promise that will make a huge difference, not only in your life, but in the lives of those around you. Father, thank you for the opportunity to talk about such a difficult topic this morning. Thank you that you have shared with us all throughout the pages of Scripture, all throughout the letters and documents and information that have been saved for thousands of years, that you are our source, you're our provider, you are the one who knows what we have a need of and who meets that need. Lord, hearing about this enemy of our heart, this enemy of greed, it's not easy. We want to put up a wall, or at least I do, put up a wall and say, hey, I'm not greedy. That's not me. But Father, my prayer is that each and every one of us would look deep within our hearts and we would be honest with you and honest with ourselves. Lord, we'd take out our bank statements, take out our checkbooks and look online at our banking and see what are we doing? How much are we giving away? How much are we storing and hoarding for ourselves? And I'm not talking about being foolish with money. You want us to be wise with money. You tell us in your word that we need to count the cost of things that we do and just be wise and be good stewards of what you've blessed us with, and we believe that. But God, we don't want to become good stewards to the point that we are hoarding everything away rather than giving the things that you've blessed us with so that we can bless someone else. Would you just do a deep work in me and in us? Help us to see where we need to grow and mature. Help us to remove the roots of fear from our hearts. In Jesus' name.